Kathleen Lane, and we are excited today to just share this informational overview of Ci3T, which stands for Comprehensive Integrated Three-Tiered Models of Prevention. And our goal in this short little presentation is just to give you a snapshot of what this model is and how we believe it has the potential to build an efficient, effective structure for organizing all that's taking place in your school, or if you're doing it at scale, in your district. When we think about Ci3T, I want to emphasize that this was initially designed in the beginning stages in 1996 in partnership with one school in Southern California. And since that time, we've had the opportunity to work with district partners in a number of different states in California, Arizona, Tennessee, Missouri, Vermont, Washington, the list goes on. And then through those learnings, what we have had the opportunity to do is to refine this model. The big idea behind it is to move away from separate systems taking place in a building. So for example, and oftentimes there are many different teams taking place. You might have in a school a team dedicated to academic issues. You might have another team that's looking at discipline, looking at office discipline referrals and trying to make decisions on how to respond to both prevent and respond to challenges, and yet another team focused on supporting kids' social and emotional well-being. In a Ci3T model of prevention, this entire model was designed to put all those pieces together. So in a Ci3T model, you'll notice at the base there is an academic domain, a positive behavior intervention and support domain, which is the behavioral domain, and then you'll see a social component, which is designed to teach kids the soft skills that they need to not only do well in school, but also to do well in life as they make decisions in terms of post-secondary outcomes. So you can think about Ci3T as a broadening of MTSS, whereas MTSS focuses predominantly on reading and math and behavior. This is now expanded to address social and emotional learning as well. And just by virtue of attending schools, all students in a building, the general education students, students that are on an IEP, all access this Tier 1 support. And when we look at those specific building blocks, we want to make sure that that is the full set of experiences that are there for students. And to accomplish that, we have worked with partners through the years to develop Ci3T blueprint materials that actually define roles and responsibilities so that you are clear as not only what is expected of students, but how you empower faculty and staff to be able to create this change of context for students. Also, families play a very important role both in the planning and in the implementation. So you'll see in the blueprints information about what parents need to know, their roles and responsibilities as well. And finally, you'll even see clarities for the administrators, because the administrators are the ones who are going to be leveraging the resources to make sure that we are empowering adults to then empower students. So as we look at the big ideas behind Ci3T, it's not just clarities in Tier 1 practices, it's also making clear plans for what to do when students need more than Tier 1 has to offer. So there are plans for what you're going to do at Tier 2 and Tier 3. And rather having that all based on teacher referral, you'll notice in the Ci3T blueprint, we are using school-wide data collected on every single student, including information also on treatment integrity and social validity of Tier 1 practices, because we want to make sure those things are in place. We're going to use those data to connect kids to additional supports that, if implemented with fidelity, are likely to yield that desired change for them, whether it's an increase in reading or improved social skills, or it might be improving social interactions or minimizing disruptions. And when we think about Tier 2 and Tier 3, we're simply looking at different levels of intensity, with Tier 3 supports reserved for the students with most intensive intervention needs. And then there will be instances where students may need to go directly to Tier 3 supports. So as we're thinking about Ci3T today, we're going to give you a little bit more about the core components of this as you're considering this systems change for your school or for your district. And I want to be clear, Ci3T is not one more thing on your plate. As a very talented partner shared with us, it is the plate. It is the method by which you're going to organize every single district initiative. So it's not that you're doing Ci3T and something else. Ci3T is going to be the organizational frame for all the happenings in your school to create those transparencies for all your stakeholders. So now let's take a look at the academic component. In the academic component, we want to create clarities of what is expected to support instruction from preschool all the way through high school. So in the blueprint, in the academic column, you're going to see that when you look at the stakeholders, students, faculty and staff, families, and administrators, we're going to create some clarities around the roles and responsibilities. And our idea here is to level the playing field, not just for students, but also for teachers, so that we are really clear on what you want to happen instructionally. And so we're going to put information in, like how you want to teach reading, how you want to connect to district or state standards. And then we're going to empower teachers with these low-intensity supports, things like how to use behavior-specific praise, how to increase kids' opportunities to respond, how to incorporate instructional choices. And as we're doing that with the goal of making sure that we are having these rich experiences at Tier 1 where students can access instruction. And as we are supporting students, we also want to make sure that we are using the data that we collect as part of regular school practices to transition kids from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3 supports according to individual needs. The nice part about this is that we have this opportunity to make sure that we have these partnerships between general and special education partners in this model. And as we're thinking about threading kids through these different supports, we want to be clear, Tier 3 is not special education. Kids on an IEP are participating in every level of prevention. When we think about the social component as part of this training process, you will work with your district Ci3T leadership team, or if you're doing this as a single standalone school, you'll also have the opportunity to work with your team to make decisions about what the validated program is you want to bring into your building. You want to think about that very carefully. So we'll connect you with resources such as those at Castle and What Works Clearinghouse so that you can make a decision that is both fiscally responsible, but also one that is evidence-based, because we want to make sure that we are teaching kids the soft skills that they need to become self-determined learners, and make sure that they essentially have the skill sets that they need to successfully negotiate relationships with their teachers and with their peers and eventually into adulthood. And we want to be cautious about making sure that that is a data-informed decision when adopting a curriculum, same way we would do with reading and math curriculum. At the core of this model is positive behavior intervention and support. And we've learned through the wonderful lessons learned about the value of clarifying what's expected for students at Tier 1. And you'll see matrices that define what is expected in classrooms, in hallways, during arrival and dismissal, during athletic events, and so on. And this is theoretically grounded, the entire model, in applied behavior analysis. And we've learned that when you clarify these expectations and you teach behavior, in quotes, just like you teach academics, you're going to give kids the opportunity to practice and receive acknowledgments for meeting expectations. So the PBIS element is not a curriculum. It's not something that you buy. It is something that you build. And when you look at the expectation matrices that are featured in schools that are doing PBIS or Ci3T, these are instructional tools, and that's why it's very important for your full faculty and staff to weigh in on how these are built. And this is true for elementary, middle, and high school. This becomes a way of clarifying for every single student about how to play the school game. So when we think about this base component of Tier 1, this is what's going to be an access point for every single student. And part of closing achievement gaps for different groups of kids is closing these gaps in access. And we're all clear that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all model, so there should be absolute plans for what to do when kids need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And if you have students that have Tier 2 needs or Tier 3 needs, it is not a tragedy. That is an expectation. But just as though you want to put evidence-based practices, strategies, and programs in place at Tier 1, we want to do the exact same thing at Tier 2. And when we think about Tier 2, think about the leverage point. It is simple adjustments. It doesn't always have to mean going to a small group instruction. I've had the opportunity to do CrossFit with my daughter, Katie, for a number of years. And it's been one of the best examples I can think of data-informed decision-making and adjustments, if you would. When I go in to do a workout with my daughter, she might be on a wall upside down doing a handstand push-up with like 45-pound plates on either side to get a deficit to make it harder for her. And I might be that person that's leaning over on a box and doing modified push-ups that way. She might be on the rig and she might be doing chest to bars because that's where she's at. I might be on that same rig and using rubber bands so that I can get a leg in there and pull up, and I might need 2 bands to make that happen. Those modifications are all happening in the same box. My coach is supporting me in a different way than she's supporting Katie, but the bottom line is we are looking for those adjustments that need to be made. And yes, sometimes absolutely there will be tier 2 supports that take place outside of the classroom. But to connect kids to those supports, we want to make sure it is not a guess as to who needs what. And that's why we use data 3 times a year to actually look at every single student in the building to see what they might need. So I'm going to look at fall, and I'm going to look at winter, and I'm going to look at spring. As such, one of the big things that we need to think about in the building process is making sure that we have reliable, valid methods of not only benchmarking academics 3 times a year, but also benchmarking on behavior and social emotional behavioral patterns. So for behavior screenings, just like academics, I'm going to do those 3 times a year. The first one happens 4 to 6 weeks after the year begins, and then I do it again before winter break, and then again 4 to 6 weeks at the end of the year. And those aren't the only sources of data I'm looking at. I'm also looking at fidelity data when I get to implementation, like what's being implemented in fall and spring. And at both time points, we get information during the implementation stage to find out what the stakeholders, the faculty and staff, think about the goals and the procedures and the intended outcomes. And this information is used to shape ongoing professional learning. All this information about assessment is clearly broken down into a 1-page assessment schedule, which is also part of the Ci3T blueprint. And those data are used to make decisions about what's happening at Tier 1. We've got wonderful data from some of our district partners where we looked at shifts and risks over time. The slide you might be looking at right now is one that shows one middle school that was implementing, and you see the green bars getting bigger over time. This suggests that the percentage of kids in the low-risk category is getting bigger over time. And so I want to look at how my school as a whole is performing in terms of not just implementation, but student outcomes. And then I want to make wise decisions about how to connect kids to Tier 2 support. So you have, in the building process, intervention grids that are set up. And as you look at these core components, for every intervention, you're going to describe what that intervention is. And it's not a person. Remember that the intervention is something that the person does. We're going to want a good description of it. We're going to have some clarities about for whom might this be a good idea. So we have inclusion criteria. And then anything that we do for a student that needs more, we need to know those same 3 things. Is it being implemented? Treatment integrity. We need to know how people feel about it even before you start. So, because if a student is telling you they're not comfortable with that intervention, it's very unlikely that they're going to engage in a meaningful way. And then we want to know how it's working, so we might benchmark over time. And then we want to have plans to determine when to conclude that intervention. So I have to think about an exit criteria so that it's not like kids are checking into these interventions and never leaving. And for some students, it might be that one Tier 2 support was sufficient to suffice. I might have done something like a small group reading intervention that was coupled with a self-monitoring intervention to help that student engage. I might be doing check-in, check-out in a middle school. Each time I want to make sure I'm doing things that have enough evidence behind them to suggest that if you do this with fidelity, you're likely to get the return that you're looking for. And yet that may not be enough for some students. It may be that we need to move to the most intensive interventions, such as really intensive reading interventions, or it might be things like functional assessment-based interventions. But regardless, we want to make sure that we have in those grids at Tier 2 grids and Tier 3 grids all the listings of what's available for kids who need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And it's not just about remediation, it's also about enrichment. So these could be opportunities for kids to stretch. It might be a book study and so on. So when we think about some of the benefits of Ci3T models, when a team comes through, and that team typically includes a principal or some administrative designee with full decision-making authority, 2 general ed teachers, a special ed teacher, another person to support the build. We strongly encourage a district coach to be available to start thinking about issues of sustainability from the very beginning. Also, if you're in partnership with a university group, you might have a coach from that group. But that is the group that comes through the planning process. And you'll hear a little bit more about that over this 6-part training series, but in general, it's spaced out over the entire academic year so that you have an opportunity not just for this team to come together, but to have planned iterative feedback loops from your faculty and staff. So these sessions alternate, 2-hour sessions, full day, 2-hour, full day, 2-hour, full day. And your whole faculty and staff don't come to those, your Ci3T leadership team members do. But there's planned conversations with your faculty and staff in between each one. And there's also data-informed decision-making that takes place. For example, after session 4, you'll have a draft of what's going to happen at Tier 1 or your ideas around it, and it's truly just a draft. Your faculty and staff will complete a measure called the Primary Intervention Rating Scale, and that was a modification of the IRP 15 if you are a researcher. And that information, we have actually learned that school site mean at the end of session 4 actually predicts how teachers report implementing that following year. So we're going to use these pieces of information. Now, some of the benefits, as I mentioned, is that you do have dedicated time for your team to come and plan out the vision for your school. Another benefit of it is it's going to create some clarities within your community. And I know nobody loves it when district boundaries get redrawn, but when they do, that's okay, because you're going to have a Ci3T blueprint for each of your schools explaining what those experiences are. If you're fortunate enough to be involved in a district where it is going district-wide, the district will likely have certain Ts that they want to see happening at every elementary school, every middle, and every high school, and maybe some certain Ts that are consistent across the entire district. So from a district perspective, it gives you all new sources of data as you're looking at your school improvement plans, as you're looking at your strategic plans. It's a way to create consistencies across your entire district. It can be used in the onboarding of new principal leaders, new district leaders, hiring new principals, hiring new faculty and staff, because you're essentially building what is like a constitution for your district and your school to say, this is how we meet students' academic, behavior, and social and emotional needs. Also, it really helps to help parents know what's going to be happening at the school, because not every parent has the same experience with education, and some people may feel more successfully able to negotiate the school setting than others, but we want to have these clarities in communication. So at this point, I want to just encourage you to continue exploring our website, ci3t.org, to learn more about how to build your Ci3T model, and you'll find a tab there. And we'd also invite you to look at a little bit more about the lessons learned along the way in terms of implementation. And I want to close just by letting you know that at the end of this building process, when you have your Ci3T blueprint in place, that is really the beginning of the journey. As you're getting into implementation, you'll see in these different graphics that you'll find here and online that you are going to continue to engage in professional learning that is data informed. So 2 nice features of Ci3T, like all tiered systems, you're going to use data to guide the student experience, and in a Ci3T model, you're going to use your social validity and treatment fidelity data from implementation years to shape the professional learning experiences. And this is wonderful for districts because it lets you hone in on what your faculty and staff need to know more about to successfully implement academic, behavior, and social and emotional learning supports at Tier 1. So thank you for your time today, and we wish you every success as you build and install. Take care.